When it comes to loose painting, we often assume what we need is practice or brushwork or formal training and technique. But most of the time, the biggest thing holding you back isn't actually in the painting at all. It's in your drawing skills. In my experience teaching hundreds of artists to loosen up their painting style, I've found that if your drawing confidence is holding you back, it is probably the biggest thing standing in your way of painting loosely. And at the end of the day, this is what I love doing, helping artists who have been painting for a while but have hit a plateau to find and master their voice of expressive, painterly artwork in oil. So when I tell you that it's not your technique and it's not your tools, it's your drawing, I want you to seriously stop and consider this. Because at the end of the day, I want to help you to make the breakthroughs in your painting career that you are after. And yours could very well start right here. So if you struggle to get a likeness, or you find yourself repainting a face over and over again and smothering the life out of your paintings in the process, here are the steps that I would recommend to my students so that you can put them to use for yourself to break free of this cycle and paint loosely without sacrificing your accuracy. And make sure to watch through to the very end because I'm going to talk through how this painting that you are seeing me make here represents me going through one of the specific steps that I'm going to give you today. And I'm going to talk about exactly what it helped me to transform in my own work. So if you suspect that your drawings are holding back your ability to paint loosely, I want you to start with this step. If you're using a projector or you're tracing your drawing in order to get your painting started, the first thing we need to do is give you the confidence to move past that. Now, a lot of professional artists use projectors or they use tracing in their own practices, and this isn't to say that you should never use these tools. It is simply to say that an over-reliance on this tool could be posing a problem for you. With any of the tools that I talk about in this video, I like to use them where appropriate, but I always want to make sure that I don't have to use them. That way, if I am ever out painting on location and I don't have access to any of these tools, I can still come away with a great painting. So, going back to this idea of breaking free of a projector or breaking free of tracing, this is actually where a grid can be great. Because at this stage, a grid gives you a great amount of structure while still forcing you to flex your drawing muscles and develop the skills necessary to reach that next level. Now, the exact setup of your grid, if you are focused on transitioning away from a projector or away from tracing, there isn't really one hard and fast rule as far as how you should be setting up your grid. But in general, I typically see grids having more squares for beginner setups versus fewer squares, or even just going into quadrants for more advanced setups. The exact setup that you will use really depends on the level of detail in your painting or just how much information you are needing to transfer. But I would say, as a general rule, you can think of your ideal grid being made up of roughly 1 or 2 inch squares. Just the right size so that you don't have a million little squares to fill in, but you also can look at each individual square and think to yourself, yeah, I could copy over that part of the line drawing. I would use this method until you start to really get in a rhythm with it and you actually feel totally confident moving away from a projector or from tracing in general. Now, at the point at which you can reliably get the key proportions down accurately using a grid, you can either drop the grid down to just 4 quadrants, or you can drop the grid altogether and use the envelope method to help you out. The envelope method is a concept that is often taught in bark drawing, especially to beginner bark drawing students, that essentially has you look for the negative space between your subject and the edges of your paper or canvas or whatever you happen to be working on. I personally continue to use this to this very day. I find it's really helpful for being able to place the subject in the right spot within the canvas that I'm working on, and it helps me to just balance my positive and negative shapes to get a more accurate likeness down. One key caveat that I will mention, both for this stage and the one before, is that I find that it's easiest to work on your drawing with the help of a photo or a master copy, since you aren't having to worry in that particular example about making the transition from a 3D reference to your 2D drawing or painting. And you don't have to worry about a model's position shifting over time either. So if you're already working from something that's 2D, it's going to make this process much easier. It also helps if your reference is the exact same size and cropping as your canvas or paper that you're working on, so that you can use a number of additional tools to help you check your drawing. Either, one-to-one measuring, using a mirror, using something like a Photoshop overlay, etc. If you actually do have the exact same size and dimensions of reference as you do canvas that you're working on, you can actually use something like a ruler or like using the tip of your brush that you mark off in order to actually get the measurement between something like the eyes, for instance, or the measurement from the hairline to the bottom of the chin. Because it's going to be a one-to-one, you can easily measure that on your reference and then translate it over to your original to make sure that you're on track. Similarly, if your reference is set up right next to your painting or your drawing and they're lined up perfectly, you can easily use a mirror. Now, to use a mirror to check your drawing, all you're going to do is actually bring the mirror right up to your face, and you can either bring it to one side or you can bring it just above your eye line, and you will angle it so that you can see the reflection of your drawing and the reference in the mirror, and you will actually use that flipped version that you see in the mirror to help you to quickly catch any big drawing changes that you have between the reference and your work. And finally, one tech hack that I really like implementing is using Photoshop to check the exact same thing. If you know that the dimensions of your canvas are the exact same as the dimensions of your reference, you can very easily take a photo of the image that you're working on, put it into Photoshop over top of your reference, line up the corners so the images should match completely, and if you lower the transparency on your drawing layer, you should actually be able to really clearly see what the differences are between the drawing that you've put down and where the drawing should actually be. I have an entire video walking through this process in case that all sounds a little bit abstract, so I'll go ahead and link that up in the upper right-hand corner for you. Now, the third step, once you're pretty comfortable working without a grid, practice blocking in with paint instead of with pencil if that's what you've been doing up until now. The reasoning is this. When you paint loosely, you're going to inevitably cover up your preliminary pencil marks, which means that loose realism requires that you constantly lose and then rediscover your drawing as you go along. Starting with paint from the very beginning can help you to get comfortable with this process and not overly reliant on keeping those initial drawing marks visible throughout the entire piece, which in turn oftentimes really encourages you to tighten up. So if you're comfortable going in and establishing your drawing with paint from the very beginning, oftentimes it gives you that confidence that comes from continually kind of losing your drawing and continually having to rediscover it. I find that this particular step is huge. It may feel like a really small adjustment, but in my experience, when students feel confident enough to step away from using pencil in the block-in stages of a painting and draw with paint right from the very beginning, that typically tends to be when the looseness really comes through in their work. Once you've successfully progressed through each of the previous steps, you can take the plunge into working from life, which is what you're seeing me do here in this video. You may feel like you're flying blind at first, but you can still use things like a viewfinder or a proportional divider or a measuring tool if you're feeling stuck. The reason that this step is so useful, though, other than simply building your confidence, is that when you have a bit of distance on your model, you naturally learn to focus on the big shapes and the big relationships. Instead of hyperfixating on whether the nose is just a millimeter to the left, you realize that you could have abbreviated the entire eye with just a couple of brushstrokes. And this is when the real breakthroughs in looseness tend to come. Personally, when I'm working from life, I find that a few habits that we often talk about as being great for loose expressive painting just come so much more naturally to me. The first is that I typically have much more distance on my subject matter when I'm working from life versus when I'm working from a photograph. So when I work from a photograph, I am typically maybe 2 feet away from the screen that I'm displaying my reference on, and I'm also probably 2 feet away from my easel at any given time. I'm often sitting when I do this, and the result is that it's really easy to see the reference and my painting with a great degree of detail, and it's super easy to get distracted by that detail when you're that close. But when I'm working from life, I'm often, 8 feet back from the model already. So I have a bit more perspective and a bit less clarity than I tend to do when working from a photo. I also might actually squint a little bit more or choose to take my glasses off so that I really am forced to see the big picture and not get distracted by little tiny details. That being said, the reason that I put this step later in the process, obviously working from life offers tremendous benefits that I've just laid out for you. That being said, I find that a lot of artists can often get intimidated when it comes to working from life, or it can become a somewhat discouraging experience because it's like being thrown in the deep end. There are a number of factors at play here, from working with other artists present who might be able to see your progress on a particular piece. I know that that can feel overwhelming for a number of artists, but I think the big one is that you simply can't, bust out your grid. Or you can't trust that the model's going to be in exactly the same pose they were when you started your session, and it can lead you to kind of second guess a lot of your drawing work. So I typically recommend that artists work their way up to this if they aren't already comfortable or practiced working from life. It's certainly not that you couldn't benefit from working from life or that you aren't ready, but rather I find for most students, kind of working your way up to this slowly gives you this ideal blend of confidence and preparedness once you actually do start working with a model, for instance. For me, I noticed that painting from life at a distance, especially during a limited 3-hour model session where I knew that I would have limited time, I noticed my painting came out much more loosely than my others, and that was really exciting. I actually went back home and tested this, painting off of a photo, but doing it while standing and while in the company of other people like I had here, and I just didn't get the same results. So I do think that when you're at the point where you can really benefit from working from life, it's worth it to go ahead and make this happen as regularly as possible. And finally, one trick that I have started suggesting to my students is to move your taboret or palette at least 8 feet back from your easel. And while you're at it, keep all of your brushes there too. That way, you're forced to back up after almost every single mark that you put down, and you are further forced to focus on the big picture because you're standing at a distance both from your canvas and from your subject. If you paint sitting, you could also put your chair at this distance, so you have plenty of opportunities to rest your body, but you're taking in the big picture while you're doing it. So just to further illustrate what this would look like, you would have your subject set up, you would have your easel probably somewhat near your subject, and then about 8 feet back from your easel, you would have your taboret with your palette and with your brushes set up, and every time you go to clean a brush, to mix paint, or to load a brush, you have to do that from a distance on both your canvas and your subject. That way, you should really be looking at your subject and looking at your painting, most of all, when you are at a distance. Then all you do to go and make the mark on your canvas is once you have your brush loaded up, you walk forward, you make the mark, and then you walk back again to assess whether that mark really went down in the right place or in the right value or in the right color. As you listen to me go through each of these steps, I'm really curious to hear from you. Where do you feel like you are on this journey? What you'll find as you go through each of these steps is the more dialed in your drawing process actually is, the more you're able to put down a loose mark early and leave it. And that tends to be the biggest predictor of how loose your final painting will actually turn out. Because even if you put down the perfect loose mark at the very beginning of your painting, if you realize your drawing is off and you have to erase that mark, well, suddenly it's probably going to look a bit more overworked because you literally had to go in and work into that mark more. So the closer we can get to an accurate drawing in the very beginning, the more we are set up for success in terms of achieving the looseness that we're actually after. And as we're able to consistently find the drawing more efficiently, that is, we are able to do less work in the drawing stage because we just happen to land on the likeness early. That tends to be when we have a whole new level of looseness in our work. And this is the stage that I constantly find myself working through, where I really want to do what I can to find the drawing early and efficiently so that I can focus on the looseness. If this is the kind of thing you're after in your work too, I would love to speak with you. Like I said earlier, this is what I do. I help artists to find their own voice, their own painting style of loose, expressive brushwork. And if you feel that you could use guidance on this journey, or you just want a step-by-step roadmap similar to the one that I laid out for drawing in this video, I would love to help you. To find out more and to see if we are a fit to work together, check out the link in the description to find out more and to reach out to me to see if we would be a fit to work together. Until then, I look forward to hearing from you about where you're at in your drawing and loose painting journey down in the comments. Happy painting.